You step outside on a cold morning and the sun finally clears the horizon. Something in your chest loosens. Your shoulders drop. Without deciding to, you feel a little bit better than you did 30 seconds ago. Here's the uncomfortable part. That reaction isn't a coincidence, and it isn't new. Ancient humans on nearly every continent, with no contact with each other, looked at that exact same light and decided it was a god. Not a symbol of a god. The god itself. Egypt had Ra. The Inca Empire had Inti. Japan had Amaterasu. Rome eventually built an entire state religion around Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. These civilizations never met, never traded ideas, never read each other's texts, and yet they all arrived at strikingly similar conclusion. Whatever else exists, the thing crossing the sky every single day deserves worship above almost everything else. That kind of pattern, repeated independently across the entire planet, usually isn't random. It means the sun was solving something too important to ignore. 3 separate threads of evidence, food, architecture, and your own biology, explain exactly what that was. Start with the most practical reason: survival. Ancient economies ran almost entirely on agriculture, and agriculture runs almost entirely on the sun. Get the planting season wrong by even a few weeks, and a community could face real famine. In Egypt, the flooding of the Nile and the growing season were both tracked against the sun's movement, and Ra wasn't just a distant sky figure. He was credited with literally piloting a boat across the heavens each day to guarantee the crops kept growing. Halfway around the world, the Inca built an empire on the same logic. Inti, their sun god, wasn't worshipped out of vague reverence. Incan emperors claimed direct descent from him, which meant the ruling family's authority was tied directly to the thing every farmer depended on to eat. Temples of the sun held enormous stores of gold, not because gold was decorative, but because gold didn't tarnish. It was considered the sun's actual flesh, permanent and untouchable, exactly like the thing it represented. Which means, in 2 civilizations that never met, the exact same idea took hold. Whoever controls the story about the sun controls the thing everyone needs to survive. Here's where it gets interesting. Long before Egypt or the Inca, Neolithic humans were already engineering entire monuments around solar movement, with a level of precision that should genuinely surprise you. In Ireland, a massive stone structure called Newgrange was built around 3200 BCE, older than the Great Pyramid of Giza, older than Stonehenge. Once a year, on the winter solstice, and only for about 17 minutes, a beam of sunlight travels down a narrow passage and illuminates the innermost chamber and nowhere else. On no other day. That's not decoration. That's an instrument. Building a passage precise enough to catch 17 minutes of light one day a year required generations of careful observation. Without telescopes, without writing, without any tool beyond patience and memory. Stonehenge, built centuries later in England, aligns its main axis with the sunrise on the summer solstice and the sunset on the winter solstice, meaning 2 separate Neolithic cultures independently decided the most important thing they could build was a calendar made of stone, pointed at the sky. This is the part that should unsettle you a little. These weren't primitive people guessing. They were tracking a celestial cycle accurate enough to still function correctly 5,000 years later, which means solar worship wasn't just belief. It was applied science, centuries before the word existed. But maybe the deepest reason isn't cultural or architectural at all. It's biological, and it's still running inside you right now. Every human's internal clock, your circadian rhythm, is regulated by a tiny cluster of cells in the brain that responds almost exclusively to sunlight. Sunlight hitting your eyes each morning resets your hormone cycles, tells your body when to release cortisol, and eventually when to release melatonin so you can sleep. Your skin also uses direct sunlight to manufacture vitamin D, a compound your body cannot reliably produce any other way, one tied to bone strength, immune function, and mood regulation. Take that light away for long enough, through a genuinely dark winter or months without proper daylight, and a measurable number of people develop seasonal affective disorder, a real diagnosable depression triggered almost entirely by the absence of sunlight. Which means the emotional lift you feel stepping into morning light isn't poetic. It's your actual neurochemistry, responding to input it evolved to depend on for hundreds of thousands of years before anyone built a temple. Ancient humans didn't invent a reason to worship the sun. They noticed a reaction that was already happening inside their own bodies and built a religion to explain it. Here's the uncomfortable part. We tend to think of ancient sun worship as superstition, a primitive misunderstanding that science eventually corrected. But look at what was actually happening underneath the mythology. Egyptian and Incan priests were tracking agricultural cycles with real accuracy. Neolithic engineers were building functioning astronomical instruments out of stone, and every single one of them was responding to a biological pull toward sunlight that modern neuroscience has only recently been able to name. They didn't have the vocabulary of vitamin D or circadian rhythms, so they used the vocabulary they had, gods, boats crossing the sky, ancestors descended from light, to describe something true they couldn't yet explain any other way. So the next time morning light hits your face and your mood quietly lifts, remember the Egyptian farmer timing his planting by Ra's boat across the sky. Remember the Neolithic builders who aimed an entire stone passage at 17 minutes of winter light. Remember that your own brain still runs the same basic program that convinced them the sun deserved worship. They weren't wrong to feel what they felt. They just didn't have a word for biology yet, so they called it a god instead. You didn't invent that feeling in the morning light. You inherited it.